Where and why do urban legends originate? Can places hold on to spiritual energy? Do ghosts mean us harm, or is there something else they're trying to accomplish? Today, we're going to revisit a few spooky stories from past episodes. You'll learn about why so many colleges and universities appear to be haunted, places where tragedy seems to repeat itself, characteristics of some of the most popular ghost stories, and why Charleston, South Carolina seems to be home to so many spirits. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 157, Stories of Spirits from the Carolinas. In episode 47, I discussed 5 southern colleges outside of the Carolinas rumored to be haunted and visited by ghostly apparitions. One thing I found interesting was an interview with a professor from the University of Tennessee from October 2012. Professor Steve Sparks said contemporary myths and urban lessons on college campuses teach us a story. They usually occur during times of cultural and societal shifts that people are uncomfortable with, and they generally tend to be a throwback to the tradition and not toward the shift. A professor from Penn State, who wrote the book America's Haunted Universities, Ghosts That Roam the Hallowed Halls, said college campuses can be some of the best settings for spooky tales. He said one role of ghost stories is to help create a sense of community among the populations of students who have all arrived from different places, both geographically and emotionally. Ghost stories can pass on historical information and offer warnings about real threats facing college students. Here's an example of that. In the book, A Murder on Campus, co-author Brian Santana shares how he first heard about the spirit of a young woman allegedly haunting the Carol Belk Theater at UNC Asheville. He writes, "The first time I walked into Carol Belk Theater, I saw a whimsical photograph of a beautiful woman painting scenery from a past era. I first learned her name when a classmate walked up behind me and said, 'Hey, that's Ginger Olson. She died in Carol Belk and her spirit haunts the theater.' Later, I learned she had been murdered, not at the theater, but in the Biltmore Botanical Gardens across the street from the university. Still later, I was told she was raped and murdered near the Botanical Gardens. It seemed like the story changed slightly each year, but the result always remained tragic." Virginia Ginger Olson was murdered in 1974, and while there have been numerous suspects, it was never officially solved. I attended UNCA in the mid-1990s, and while I never heard anything about someone seeing the spirit of a young woman in Carol Belk Theater, I can see why it would become one of those urban legends on the campus. To me, it would serve as a warning to unsuspecting female students that no matter where you are, even a small, insulated university in a college mountain town, danger lurks everywhere. I hope that if students did hear this cautionary tale, it motivated them to be more aware of their surroundings and to be mindful of that while navigating the campus and beyond. There are those who believe that ghosts are the result of spiritual energy remaining at a location. In episode 31, Where Are the Children?, I shared Susan Smith's story of how she let her 2 toddlers drown in John D. Long Lake in South Carolina before telling police a black man had hijacked her car and kidnapped the kids. She was eventually convicted of their murders and was sentenced to life in prison. But there are those in the area who now believe the lake is haunted. In September of 1996, another unexpected tragedy occurred there. A group of 10 people had driven out to the lake one Saturday night in a Chevy Suburban. They parked next to the boat ramp, shining the headlights of the vehicle on the granite memorials that had been placed there to preserve the memories of Michael and Alex Smith. 5 people had gotten out of the car when it started to roll down the embankment. There were 4 children and 1 adult still inside. The 2 people who had gotten out of the truck, including the wife and mother of 4 of the passengers inside, went into the water to try and save them. All 10 people drowned during the incident. Sheriff Howard Wells, the man who had been so instrumental in encouraging Susan to confess to her crime, told the media he could not figure out why no one was able to stop the truck from plunging 15 feet into the water. The entire family who drowned there were from Buffalo, a small community outside of Union. 26-year-old Tim Phillips, his 22-year-old wife Angie, and their three children, Courtney, 4, Milena, 23 months, and Kinsley, 4 months, were among those who died. Carl Sidney White, age 29, and Austin Cody Roadvotes, age 3, both of South Carolina, also drowned in the incident. In a newspaper article about the accident, a Union County resident told a reporter about the lake, "It's like it's haunted or something. It keeps taking lives." Guilford College is another place built on land believed to be inhabited by a number of spirits. In episode 16, Ghostly Tales from the Carolinas, I spoke about how the Battle of Guilford Courthouse was a Revolutionary War battle fought on March 15, 1781 in Greensboro. The battle resulted in a British victory, and many soldiers from both sides were wounded and killed. The area was used as a field hospital for the wounded and dying. There's also a cemetery directly across the street from the campus that has graves dating back to the 18th century, including a mass grave of both British and American soldiers from the American Revolution. But the site of the auditorium on campus contains a history that lends itself to potential hauntings. Dana Auditorium at Guilford College is named for Charles Dana, a philanthropist who donated a good chunk of money toward the completion of the building in the 1900s. According to school records, shortly after the auditorium was completed in 61, strange happenings began to take place. Some believe the spirit of a wounded soldier who died at the field hospital explores the building. There have also been tales of a young girl spotted in the choir room and a man in a brown suit. Others walking by the auditorium at night have heard the faint sounds of a piano playing from within when no one was supposed to be in the building. One student told a local reporter from Greensboro about an experience he had while inside the auditorium. He said all the lights turned off because it was later at night, so he went downstairs where he heard a piano playing. He thought it might be some of his friends from the music department, but when he went into the choir room, no one was there. He tried to exit out the back door of the building, but it was locked. He felt the room grow significantly colder. He turned around and found his friends in another hallway and told them about the door locking. When they returned to the exit with him, it opened without a hitch. Nancy Roberts was a Southern author who has often been described as the First Lady of American folklore. She authored many books on ghosts and Southern folklore, traveling the country to collect tales of hauntings and ghostly spirits from those who experienced them directly. While Roberts is now deceased, in October of 1980, she shared a little of what she had learned over the years with the Charlotte News. She said there were many similarities in ghost stories she'd heard over the years involving soldiers from wars throughout the centuries. They were most likely to be men who died violently. Often, these spirits are seeking to have something fulfilled or to communicate with a loved one. Once they are able to do that, they vanish. Here was one story she shared. Such was the ghost of a man who died at Salem Tavern in Winston-Salem one long ago November. 4 days after his death, the staff heard strange noises and saw items falling off counters mysteriously. One night, the innkeeper saw a shadowy apparition in the hall and heard a voice say, "Please notify my brother of my death." Once the innkeeper did so, the spirit vanished and never returned. Robert said the concept of ghosts coming back to frighten people originates with the Druids, the old Gaelic priests of the past, who tried to frighten their followers into compliant behavior. She said most ghosts she learned about in her research were not frightening. Sometimes they were even on helpful missions. More often than not, they were confused about their state. She mentioned one ghost from Charlotte that a couple on Park Road had encounters with. They believed it was the spirit of the former owner who was killed in a car accident. The apparition would bump into things in the middle of the night, open doors, turn lights on and off, and even crawled into bed with family members. The family eventually moved. Roberts mentioned love is usually related to many female ghosts and apparitions, such as the story of the Pink Lady at the Grove Park Inn and Helen from Helen's Bridge, both in Asheville. Back in episode 16, I shared the story of Lydia's Bridge from Jamestown, North Carolina. This is one of those common phantom hitchhiker stories where a driver picks up a female hitchhiker only to discover she's no longer in the car once they get to their destination. Patty A. Wilson's book, Cursed in the Carolinas, Stories of the Damned, describes a woman named Mary Lydia Jones who died on her prom night in an automobile accident with her date. That night, Lydia was wearing a red dress with a black sash, long red gloves, and black heels. The bridge overpass where she was killed became known as Lydia's Bridge. Another story tied to Lydia's Bridge is that Lydia died in 1923 on her way home from a New Year's Eve party. In 2022, FMY News Channel 2 reported the young woman at the center of the story wasn't actually named Lydia. A local ghost hunter and author named Michael Renee found a Greensboro Patriot News article that reported 30-year-old Annie L. Jackson died in a car accident on June 20th, 1920, beneath the old bridge. 3 other people in the car survived. Not long after that, the ghost sightings began. Renee decided to try and find family members of Annie L. Jackson and became acquainted with Robin Mitchell Taylor from Greensboro, who said she was Annie's great niece. She hadn't even known they were related until she received a genealogy report that revealed her grandmother had a sister no one in the family talked about, Annie L. Jackson. Her cause of death was listed as a fall from an automobile. She and Renee believe Annie's middle name may have been Lydia, and multiple ghost stories got mixed together over the years. There were 3 other Lydias in Guilford County who died that same year. Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. I had been unhappy with my old podcast host for a while and was looking for other options. I discovered Riverside FM and learned that for one low monthly fee, it would help me record the podcast and utilize video capabilities. It uses AI technology to easily create clips from each episode that I can then share on my social media accounts. I don't consider myself very tech savvy, but audio and video editing with Riverside FM software has been a breeze, and I look forward to recording days now. If you are looking for a company that will help you with all your podcasting, webinar, and video needs, I encourage you to check out Riverside FM. I'll include a link for you in the show notes. Are you looking to level up your writing or learn a new skill? Whether you focus on nonfiction or are more inclined to creative writing, or want to learn how to put together a digital portfolio of your writing, Wow Women on Writing can help. Interested in podcasting? Check out my digital course, You Can Start a Podcast. During this pre-recorded webinar, you will learn the benefits of creating your own podcast, materials you need to get started, how to develop content that will keep listeners coming back for more, and ways your podcast can create supplemental income. I'll share examples of different types of podcasts, how to decide on a format, ways to handle the technology necessary for creating a podcast, how to develop your first few episodes, and promotion and monetization ideas. All written materials and resources are provided by me. I'll also give you a handout with information discussed in the webinar, along with suggestions for a few different types of podcasts to explore. Best of all, it only costs $30. Learn more by clicking the Classes tab at Wow-Women on Writing. I'll put a link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. Roberts also shared with the Charlotte News that ghosts have begun to take on more modern appearances. While they once appeared on horses and in stagecoaches, they now appear in cars, trains, or planes. Or, like this story I shared from episode 16, cars on bridges. Charleston, South Carolina is a city that is literally built on the graves of others. The Cooper River Bridge, also technically known as the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge, is a cable-stayed bridge that connects Charleston to Mount Pleasant. It's also one that many people in the Carolinas are familiar with. The bridge is home to a 10K run held each spring that draws visitors and participants from several surrounding states. I wonder how many people know that the bridge put in place before the Cooper River Bridge, the John P. Grace Memorial Bridge, was the site of a tragic accident that took place on February 24, 1946. According to the book The Ghosts of Charleston, written by Julian T. Buxton III, a freighter named Nicaragua Victory dropped anchor in the Wando River near Hobcaw Point. The ship had been in the Charleston harbor for 2 days awaiting repairs, but the weather turned stormy and the anchors had been inadvertently pulled up the night before by a boatswain. With the gusts of wind brought on by the weather, the Nicaragua Victory began floating downstream. The engines were shut down at that point, and there was no way to stop it. At the same time, 3 different vehicles were climbing the 2-lane Grace Memorial Bridge's first tower, 2 cars and an Army mail truck. The 12,000-ton freighter struck one of the bridge's main pillars and tore into the support trestles. The bridge remained intact for about 3 minutes after the impact, and then bridge rivets began ricocheting through the air, hitting the deck of the freighter. The first car was able to cross the bridge safely and sped on towards Charleston. The third car, the Army mail truck, slammed on his brakes in the middle of the bridge, leapt out of the truck, and took off running back down the bridge. The second car, a 1940 green Oldsmobile carrying John Mixon, his wife Julie, his mother Lucinda Mixon, his 7-year-old son Eric, and 2-year-old daughter Allie, was not so lucky. John panicked after the impact from the freighter and stopped and started the car on the bridge multiple times before plunging into the Cooper River as the bridge sections began separating. A dive team was dispatched to the water in an effort to locate the car, but couldn't find it. A month later, the jaws of a large grappling bucket were dredging the river bottom and lifting chunks of the bridge wreckage out of the water when they caught hold of the car's rear bumper and lifted it into the air. All 5 bodies were still in the car. I want to talk for a minute on the history of this bridge. By the 1960s, the Grace Memorial Bridge had become insufficient with its narrow 2 lanes. A new bridge was constructed alongside and parallel to it. This bridge, named the Silas N. Pearman Bridge, opened in 1966 with 3 lanes and a modern 12-foot width, open to northbound traffic, while its older counterpart carried the southbound traffic into downtown Charleston. These 2 bridges became functionally obsolete by 1979. It took almost 20 years to raise financial support for the 8-lane bridge over the Cooper River, but it eventually opened in 2005. I give this history on the bridge because I find it fascinating that 2 different ghostly sightings of that Oldsmobile happened between the time of the Grace Memorial Bridge and the Cooper River Bridge construction. One of these sightings occurred in February of 1966 when a family of 5 was returning from a weekend at their family beach home on nearby Sullivan's Island. They were driving a 1965 Pontiac station wagon over the Grace Memorial Bridge. As they neared the bridge's summit, the father, driving the station wagon, panicked when an old green sedan in front of him slammed on its brakes. The driver of the station wagon immediately slammed on his brakes and shouldered into the left-hand lane. The old Pontiac continued rolling down the road. It was then that the driver of the station wagon took more of a notice of the green sedan, and what he saw startled him. The sedan appeared to be a 90s-era model, and it was in excellent condition. When he went to pass it, he noticed 5 people in the green car. His wife mentioned that the people in the sedan were acting strangely, all staring straight ahead with expressionless looks on their faces. They were dressed in clothing from an older time. The driver of the green car had a ghostly white complexion, and then the car continued on, eventually driving out of sight. 30 years later, in 1996, a woman named Harriet Langton had just moved to Charleston from Charlotte. As she drove her Honda Sport Civic onto the bridge, she began to pass a car on the left that was going slowly once they crossed over the highest point of the bridge. She looked over at the car and noticed it was from another era, possibly the 1940s. 2 children sat in the back seat with an elderly woman. A man and a woman sat in the front. All were dressed in clothing from the first half of the century. The driver turned to look at her, and Harriet was so shocked by his ghostly white face that she slammed on her brakes. The old car continued driving, eventually fading out of sight. I'd be curious to know if there have been any more recent sightings of the Mixon family car on the Cooper River Bridge. One of the main ghost tourist attractions in Charleston is the Old City Jail, which housed some of the city's most infamous criminals. The jail's most famous inmate was a woman named Lavinia Fisher, and if her spirit is haunting the jail, it may be because she could have been an innocent woman. I shared her story in episode 22, 2 True Tales from the Carolinas. She was young, beautiful, beguiling, and liked to poison the guests at her boarding house in Charleston with oleander tea. For centuries, legend had it that Lavinia Fisher was one of America's first female serial killers. But have the misdeeds of Mrs. Fisher been greatly embellished over time? If you take a tour of Charleston's Old City Jail, you can be sure to hear the tales of the time period during which Lavinia Fisher and her husband John were imprisoned there. In Patty A. Wilson's book, Cursed in the Carolinas, Stories of the Damned, she shares some of the enduring stories about the Fishers that have been an integral part of Charleston's history throughout the years. Lavinia was born in Maine in 1793 and moved to Charleston after she married her husband John. The two operated a boarding house right outside of the city known as the 6 Mile Wayfarer House. The home sat on a piece of property that is now home to a defunct naval hospital. Supposedly, the Fishers began working with a group of highwaymen who robbed travelers passing through on their way to sell hides, cotton, tobacco, and other goods. The Fishers' home was one of several boarding houses set up along a stretch of highway that is now known as Meeting Street. Once they sold their goods, the travelers would take the same route back home. The prevailing narrative that has persisted in South Carolina history is that Lavinia would sweetly entertain her guests, feed them a home-cooked meal, poison them with a warm cup of tea, and then leave her husband to rob, murder, and butcher the guests, disposing of their bodies in the cellars. Cursed in the Carolinas recounts articles published in the Post and Courier circa 1819 that told of two separate men who were attacked by the robbery gang, including Lavinia Fisher, barely escaping with their lives. The men reported the attacks to the authorities, further cementing the tales of Lavinia being a vile and violent young woman. John and Lavinia were eventually arrested for highway robbery and scheduled to be hanged because their crime was considered a capital offense at the time. Their attorney requested a rehearing, and they were held at the jail for an entire year while they waited. The Fishers attempted to escape with two other men one night, but the makeshift rope they had created fell to the ground before Lavinia could use it. Not wanting to leave his wife behind, John surrendered and went back to the jail. The Fishers were denied the right to a new trial and taken to a scaffold that was set up at the edge of the city on February 18th, 1820. According to reports from the people who were there, John was contrite, but Lavinia loudly proclaimed her innocence, begged for mercy from the crowd, and stomped her feet and cursed the governor. In Cursed in the Carolinas, Wilson recounted Lavinia's last words to be, "If any of you have a message for the devil, say it now, for I shall see him in a moment." In 2010, a retired police detective named Bruce Orr set out to explore the true story behind the Fishers' conviction. He had grown up reading about Lavinia and John and wasn't so sure of all the stories that the couple murdered men, butchered them, and buried them beneath the house. He focused much of the research for his book, 6 Miles to Charleston, The True Story of John and Lavinia Fisher, on the investigative work of another reporter named Kitty Ravenel from the 1940s. Orr couldn't find any evidence of Lavinia and John committing any of the crimes they were accused of, and instead surmised they were likely convicted due to the corruption of politicians. At the time, then-Governor John Geddes was ready to procure government funds that would enable a naval base to be built in Charleston, as President James Monroe had visited Charleston in a tour of other port cities. The base didn't materialize for another 80 years after that visit, because President Monroe didn't think Charleston was a good site for the base. If that were the case, the stories of Lavinia haunting the old city jail make sense. If she and her husband were innocent and convicted merely as a way to seize the land their boarding house was on, then Lavinia may be one very angry spirit indeed. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people and true crime profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.